For both of my children, one of their first favorite solid foods were these delicious pumpkin quote-unquote muffins. I'm putting muffins in quote marks there because obviously they're cakes. And they came from this chain restaurant, carbohydrate-based chain restaurant that we have here in the US called Panera. But then Panera got bought by private equity and they reduced their menu a whole lot, and so no more pumpkin muffins. We're gonna make pumpkin muffins at home today. There's a lot of good copycat recipes on the internet already. I made this one by Lisa Huff. Really came out nicely. I think that we can make it a little bit more accurate to the original though. And whenever you're trying to make a copycat recipe, the first thing to consider is that food companies are, well, they're not required to publish their recipes, but they are required to publish their ingredients in descending order by weight. Now, of course, Panera discontinued this item, so the website with the ingredients is down, but thanks to the good people at the Internet Archive, it's still here for us to consider. Hashtag not an ad. The Internet Archive is one of the few good things left on the internet that the tech oligarchs have not yet co-opted or destroyed, so let's support them. If we just look at the ingredients, pumpkin is number one. That's awesome. After that is soybean oil, which is what gives it its sort of box cake-like texture that I love so well. And after that is what I think the secret ingredient is, which is this palm oil and butter blend. Probably something that they use to save a little money on using straight butter. You could use straight butter, but because I have it and I really like it, I'm going to use butter-flavored shortening, which is probably a pretty similar product to the palm oil butter blend they're talking about there in the Panera recipe. I'm going to take 4 tablespoons of this and melt it. And again, if you don't want to use the shortening, you can just use real butter. It'd probably be better in some ways. There we go. And we're going to use half of that in our muffin batter and half of it in the streusel. The streusel is the crumb topping, and to make it crumbly and crummy, we start with 1/3 cup of flour, 1/4 cup of brown sugar, or in my case, I'm just using the white sugar, and then I'll give it a dab of molasses because that's all brown sugar is. It's just white sugar with a little molasses in it, and then this way I can control how much molasses I use. I usually like a little bit more, and also I don't have to keep 2 different kinds of sugar around. Time now for the pumpkin spice. Pumpkin spice so named because it accompanies pumpkin, not because it contains pumpkin. It doesn't contain pumpkin. It usually consists of cinnamon, ginger, cloves, nutmeg, right? At most, a half teaspoon of that in the streusel. I would normally give it a tiny pinch of salt, but I think that there is some salt already in this shortening. And yeah, half of this, so 2 tablespoons of melted butter or butter-flavored shortening in there. And then you just stir it up, and it should look kind of clumpy and crumbly. It's a crumb. Normally, streusel is made by cutting solid fat, solid butter into the ingredients. But I did a bunch of experiments, and the ones that I did with solid butter, it just didn't have the texture of the thing that I knew from the restaurant. I think they're using a liquid fat in the streusel, or they used to before private equity. There you go. You're looking for that kind of wet sand texture they talk about in pastry making a lot. That's done for now. Now it's time to make the actual batter. And let's get real. Like we said, this is not really a muffin. This is a cake. It's not something you ought to be eating every day. You know what you could eat every day? Factor, sponsor of this video. Just because I am a famous internet cook does not mean that I want to make all of my meals myself. I do not want to make all my meals myself. I would really other people make some of them for me, and Factor does that for me. Factor is now owned by the people who make HelloFresh. It's kind of like HelloFresh, except you don't have to do any cooking at all. They just ship fresh, never frozen meals right to your front door. You heat them up in like 2 minutes, and then you eat them. It's as simple as that. They're chef-crafted, dietitian approved, delicious, and just a way for me to sort of get my veg and protein on a regular schedule around here. Really, really juicy salmon. I don't know how they make their meat so juicy. They also send you extras if you want them. They got these nice juices, apple, beet, ginger. If you're struggling to eat what you want on a reliable schedule, man, Factor is the way to go. Especially if you're just a really, really busy person. You just need to be able to heat things up from time to time. Absolute lifesaver. Head to factor75.com or click my link below and use code 50Ragusia to get 50% off, plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's code 50Ragusia at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. Thank you, Factor. Okay, anyway, muffin batter. 2 eggs. Crack those in there. Then it's time for the canned pumpkin, 1 cup of canned cooked pumpkin. Make sure that you get pumpkin and not pumpkin pie filling, which would have a whole bunch of eggs and sugar with it already, and not necessarily in the proportions that we want. Plop in there. And then 1/3 cup of any neutral tasting oil. It doesn't have to be soybean oil. By the way, if you listen to real scientists and not just grifters who are trying to sell books, there is a legitimate health concern with these kinds of highly refined seed oils, though it's not the oil itself. It's the fact that this product is just a very, very inexpensive way to add a bunch of moisture and shelf stability to junk food. It's the chosen fat of junk food. That's not because there's anything wrong with the fat, it's more that there's something wrong with the food. In goes the remaining butter or butter flavored shortening. Oh, I need to melt that again. There we go, now I can get it in there. And I'm using the shortening because it tastes more buttery than butter actually does. And as a result, it brings a lot of flavor to this particular muffin. Also some softness. If you used straight, like real butter, it would be firmer in texture by the time you baked it. Similarly, a quarter cup of milk really softens the body of the muffin in a nice way. The ingredients on the website list water and milk flavoring, so we're just gonna use milk. A little teaspoon of vanilla. There's vanilla listed in the ingredients. And then a cup and a half of plain white sugar in with the wet ingredients. And generally with this kind of baking, you consider sugar to be a wet ingredient because it dissolves so easily into the liquid. It also provides a little bit of abrasion to kind of help you break up the eggs and everything when you're stirring the wet ingredients smooth. With a thing like this, you really want to mix up the wet ingredients first, because by the time the flour goes in, you want to mix it as little as possible to try to develop the gluten and stuff as little as possible to keep it tender. So now we can beat the crap out of it, get it really, really, really smooth. And then these kinds of recipes usually tell you to take your dry ingredients and mix them up in a separate bowl and then put them in. You can just kind of do that right on top of the wet ingredients. So it's a cup and 3/4 flour, 2 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice, or less if you don't like it quite so strong and spicy. Half teaspoon of coarse salt, and the spice and the salt could have gone in with the wet ingredients. The thing that you want to sort of put in with the dry is the last thing here, which is the baking powder, because you don't want to introduce the baking powder to the batter until you're ready to bake, because it's going to start creating the gas reaction that makes things puff up, and you don't want to outrun that. Have the reaction stop before you're actually baking. Go ahead and stir all of this up nice and smooth, just until it's smooth. All right, then we need a muffin tin, which is bigger than a cupcake tin, and that matters because if you buy cupcake papers, the little wrappers, they're gonna be too small for the muffin tin. It's actually kind of hard to find muffin papers in a normal store where I live, so I'm just gonna bake directly in the pan. That does require you to grease the pan pretty darn thoroughly if you wanna get these out. Alrighty, into the cups we go, and it goes up about 3/4 of the way up the sides of the cup. All right, tap those for a second to make sure we've got maximum room in there for the streusel, which you just pile up on top of each one. Streusel, I love streusel. One of the ways that I was able to actually reverse engineer this recipe was by comparing those Panera muffin ingredients lists with the ingredients lists for muffins that don't have streusel from Panera. And from that, you could kind of guess that some of the differences resulted from the lack of streusel. All right, so you want to bake these at 375 Fahrenheit, 190 C. These have been in there 25, 30 minutes. They're almost done. You want to do the toothpick trick, and don't let the toothpick come out too clean or dry. If there's a little bit stuck to it, that's awesome. You want them to be moist. All right, and then you gotta let them cool all the way down before you can take them out of the pan, and I'll show you the technique for that. All right, take the powdered sugar, spank them like they've been bad. Then if you don't have the paper cups, the secret for getting them to release is to grab them and then kind of twist them. Turn ever so slightly to make it release from the pan, and then you can just pull it up. Twist and release. So there you go. There is your copycat Panera style pumpkin muffin. Figured it out just in time for the kids to decide they don't like them anymore. I'm sure that'll happen.